Welcome back to In Session. I'm Beth Karras in for Vinnie Politan. New evidence is raising questions about whether Penn State officials covered for convicted child rapist Jerry Sandusky. Alleged emails show Penn State's then president Graham Spanier and two other university officials knew they had a problem with Sandusky after a 2001 shower incident, but they apparently decided to handle it themselves first, using a, quote, humane approach before deciding whether to tell outside authorities. For more, here's CNN correspondent Susan Candiotti.
Details of 4 purported email exchanges from sources with knowledge of the case, raising new questions about what Penn State knew and when they knew it. The emails are between Penn State President Graham Spanier, Vice President Gary Schultz, and Athletic Director Tim Curley, discussing the now infamous 2001 shower incident where grad assistant Mike McQuarrie said he saw Sandusky sexually assaulting a young boy. The first email is dated February 26, 2001. That's 16 days after McQuarrie reports to his boss, Coach Joe Paterno, about what he's seen in the shower. Paterno testified, quote, "It was a sexual nature." By now, McQuarrie testified he's told Athletic Director Curley and VP Schultz about exactly what he saw, a boy with his hands up against a wall with Sandusky behind him. The alleged emails don't mention Sandusky by name, instead calling him the subject and person. In the first exchange, Schultz messages Curley about a 3-part plan to, quote, talk with the subject, contacting the charitable organization, Second Mile, and contacting the Department of Welfare. That's an agency required by law to investigate suspected abuse. Yet the next night, Curley indicates a change of heart. He allegedly sends an email to Penn State's President Spanier and refers to a discussion they had 2 days earlier about Sandusky. Curley says he wants to talk things over with Sandusky and work with him before deciding whether to contact child welfare. He also refers to Coach Paterno. Did something he said change Curley's mind? Quote, "After giving it more thought and talking it over with Joe yesterday, I am uncomfortable with what we agreed were the next steps. I am having trouble with going to everyone but the person involved. I would be more comfortable meeting with the person and tell him about the information we received and tell him we are aware of the first situation." The first situation he's referring to is a separate shower incident Sandusky had with a boy in 1998. Sandusky was not charged at the time. He was convicted of both incidents at trial. Curley plans to tell Sandusky, quote, "We feel there is a problem," and offer professional help, and at some point soon inform his organization, Sandusky's Second Mile, and, quote, "maybe the other one." According to a source with knowledge of the emails, he's referring to child welfare. If Sandusky is, quote, "cooperative," Curley writes, quote, "we would work with him. If not, we do not have a choice and will inform the two groups." 2 hours later, Penn State's president purportedly responds and agrees with the approach. Quote, "I am supportive," Spanier writes, and adds this: "The only downside for us is if the message isn't heard and acted upon, and we then become vulnerable for not having reported it. But that can be assessed down the road." Spanier calls the plan humane and a reasonable way to proceed. The next day, VP Schultz weighs in with an alleged email to President Spanier and Athletic Director Curley. Quote, "This is a more humane and upfront way to handle this," he writes. "We will inform his organization with or without his cooperation. We can play by ear to decide about the other organization." Another reference a source says to outside authorities. But that never happened. Authorities say records show suspicions about Sandusky in 2001 were never reported to any outside agency. Victim 5 was molested by Sandusky in a Penn State shower about 6 months after the McQuarrie incident. And Sandusky later went on to sexually abuse at least 3 other boys. Years later, all testified at trial.
And joining us now is CNN correspondent Susan Candiotti. Susan, I understand that the attorneys for Gary Schultz and Tim Curley have issued a joint statement, and you have that statement?
They did. Yes, and I'm going to read it for you now, Beth. It says, for Curley, Schultz, Spanier, and Paterno, the responsible and humane thing to do was, like Pennsylvania's Governor Corbett, to carefully and responsibly assess the best way to handle vague but troubling allegations. Faced with tough situations, good people try to do their best to make the right decisions. So, Beth, that's their statement. I reached out to the attorney representing Mr. Spanier, the former president of Penn State, and no calls were returned, Beth.
So it sounds like their defense, since they are currently charged with lying to the grand jury about what they knew or what they, and not reporting it, that they may have known more, but their defense seems to be that they didn't really think it was serious enough to report. Is that what they're saying? It was vague?
Well, of course, all we got was a statement, so we're left to interpret it in many ways. But clearly seems to indicate that, in their view, they're calling these vague allegations. At the heart of this is the dispute about what McQueary said to Joe Paterno initially. Remember, Joe Paterno clearly testified before a grand jury that McQueary told him that he saw something sexual in nature. Now, these other the other Penn State officials are saying that McQueary only told Paterno about horsing around, and remember, they talked with him too, and said that McQueary only said Sandusky was horsing around, or he didn't really see anything, and they just called it inappropriate conduct. So that appears to be at the heart of their defense.
Right, indeed. Now, these communications, these that have recently come to light, were provided when? Because this investigation has been going on for a while, and these are just coming to light?
Well, remember, you've got a few investigations going on now. You have the one being conducted independently for Penn State University. They hired former FBI Director Louis Freeh, and he is the one, I am told, and he even issued a statement, that has turned up emails and even a file that Schultz evidently kept about Jerry Sandusky, another official at Penn State. And when all of this information was turned up in the last few months, evidently, according to my sources, it was then turned over to Pennsylvania prosecutors. And so that's why they're pouring through all this. Now, remember, there is no court date set as yet for Curley and Spanier, who are charged, as you said, both with perjury and failure to report. But the other key thing about these emails, Beth, is that for the first time, we are hearing about, allegedly, a second conversation noted in these purported emails that Joe Paterno was involved in. Now, according to these alleged emails, remember, Joe Paterno, there's a reference that he had a conversation with the athletic director, and that evidently caused this athletic director to change the plan and not alert child welfare authorities. So the question is, what did Joe Paterno say in this referred to conversation? Until now, Joe Paterno has only said publicly and testified before a grand jury that he spoke with his boss and then he left it up to Penn State to further investigate. Now, a lawyer for the Paterno family, Beth, says Joe Paterno has always told the truth, that he testified truthfully, that he himself never used emails, so you'll never find anything from him, and that they say that he never did anything to interfere with Penn State's investigation.
Well, it is indeed an interesting development, and it will be interesting to see where it leads. Susan Candiotti, thank you very much for that report. And now let's turn to criminal defense attorney Brian Claypool. I'm happy to have Brian joining us from Los Angeles. He's a criminal defense attorney and also is representing 11 families of students who are accusing elementary school teachers of sexual abuse. Now, Brian, you heard Susan's report. What effect do you think this will have on the current criminal case against Tim Curley and Gary Schultz?
Beth, these emails are bone-chilling and they are potentially devastating for not only Curley and Schultz, but possibly for the former president of Penn State, Graham Spanier. And let me make one thing clear before I talk about why. This comment by the lawyer today that these are vague allegations of child abuse, that's flat out irresponsible. Because as a mandated reporter in Pennsylvania, you have an obligation to report suspected child abuse. You don't need flat out categorical evidence of child abuse to be obligated to report it. If you even suspect it, you have to report it. And it should have been reported here. That's the most important point to make right now. And with respect to the criminal investigation, you now have two other components that may lead to additional charges for a conspiracy to commit child endangerment. Those two critical facts now are, we now know that top administration at Penn State had knowledge. They had knowledge of the incident that took place because McQueary reported it. It's been documented in emails. The second important component is you have now three top administrators with what I would purport to be an agreement. They have an agreement of a three-part plan. And an important fact that you have to prove in conspiracy is an agreement. That's the heart of a conspiracy claim. You now have an agreement between these three folks who now had this three-part plan. Then they rescinded it. They put it in the hands of an athletic director to simply say, hey, let me go talk to Jerry Sandusky. If he cooperates, we don't have to report this. Are you kidding me? That's like going to a drug addict and saying, hey, we won't send you to jail if you promise you won't do any more drugs. It's ridiculous.
So in Pennsylvania, when they supersede their charging document, they call it an amended information, you would not be surprised to see additional perjury charges and maybe conspiracy in an amended information. Is that what you're saying?
Right, Beth. I think there might be additional charges forthcoming for a conspiracy to commit child endangerment. It's very eerily similar to a recent conviction that took place in Philadelphia with a senior representative of the Archdiocese in Philadelphia, the Catholic schools there. He was actually convicted of conspiracy to commit child endangerment because of similar situations like this. So I would not be surprised if down the road there are additional charges for conspiracy to commit child endangerment. And I would not rule out just Curley and Schultz, because remember, Graham Spanier, the former president, he signed off on the ultimate decision to not report any of this to child welfare and to not report any of this to law enforcement.
Brian Claypool, thank you so much for those great insights. We're going to get